In this video, we're going to talk about how to debug your Python programs like a pro. The first thing you need to know in order to be more independent when you're debugging your programs is that errors fall into two broad categories. They can be syntax errors or they can be logic errors. We're going to talk about each of those and common mistakes that students make when they're writing their Python programs and how you can fix those. So first, let's talk about syntax errors. Those are errors that occur because you're typing an instruction or you use a word, and Python can't figure out what exactly you mean. So this could be something like you type something wrong, or you forget to include a colon in your program in the right spot. The computer just can't figure out exactly what you mean, and so it generates an error when you try to run your program. You can tell that your program has a syntax error because the computer will generate a pop-up window when you try to run your program. In most cases, your program won't run, or it'll stop running kind of in the middle of the program and provide you with an error message that helps you diagnose the problems. So we're going to talk about a few common syntax errors and how you can fix those in your own projects. Remember that Python will usually tell you the line number when it produces an error message, and that line number allows you to zero in on the area of your program where the error occurred. If you don't see anything wrong on the line that Python highlights, always remember to look at the line above it to check to make sure that there's parentheses and that they're all matched up. Probably about 50% of the error messages that people email me with in Computer Science 110 are mismatched parentheses where you haven't included all of the parentheses on a previous line, and so Python can't interpret your instructions correctly. So let's look at what that looks like when you're writing your Python program. I included a little example of code that includes a missing parentheses. I also typed it up in idle so we can see what happens. And the error message that you get just says invalid syntax. It doesn't specifically say anything about parentheses. So that can be a little bit confusing. Let's try running my module over here. It's going to ask me to save it. Again, you can see that it pops up with that error message that says invalid syntax. That's possibly a parentheses mismatch. It could be something else. If you click the OK button, it gives you the line below the line where the syntax error occurred. It's up to us to know that we also need to consider the line above it. And if you notice, I have here two opening parentheses on this line, but only one closing parenthesis. So closing that up is going to fix that syntax error and allow me to run my program successfully. So again, that's one of the most common syntax errors that students can have, a mismatched parentheses. It'll always give you an invalid syntax error on a pop-up window. And you just need to look at the line above it to make sure that you matched up the parentheses. The next most common error that students have is one where the computer tells you the indentation is inconsistent. Most of the time when you're typing in your program, if you kind of like go from top to bottom as you're typing, the Python editor will automatically indent everything the correct number of spaces. But every once in a while, maybe you add something later on in your program or during a debugging process or something, and then you end up with one line that doesn't quite line up with any of the other lines in your program. And when that happens, it confuses Python. It's concerned it can't figure out like where that line is supposed to match with. So here's an example picture where we have this while loop, then we have this clearly indented line, number score equals the input, and then we have this quiz score line that looks like maybe it's supposed to line up under the W, but you notice it doesn't quite, it's like kind of under the H, not under the W. And then there's this count line that's indented. So we can make this happen on our program by just like removing a few of the spaces here. If we try to compile that, we should get one of those unexpected indent levels messages, and that just means that in your program somewhere you have a line and it doesn't match any of the defined indentation levels. So either to fix it, you would have to unindent the Q so that it's right here under the W, or you should add a tab so that it lines up under the other values within that loop. And of course, we know in this particular program, we wanted all of these statements to be part of the loop. So we want to add indentation. But it's also possible that you would have a solution where you were supposed to unindent these particular lines that were flagged. A additional error that people commonly get is forgetting a colon. So when you're typing in Python, again, if you're typing and you include the colon, it automatically starts indenting your next statements to show that they're the body of the loop or the body of the conditional statement. If you leave that out, then you have to manually enter all of those spaces to make these lines indent. Sometimes students forget that Python's supposed to be doing that work for you. They leave out the colon and then add the spaces manually and then try to run it. When you do that, it'll give us an invalid syntax error, just like it did with the mismatched parentheses, and it'll highlight that same line, the line where the colon is supposed to be. So in this case, it's flagging exactly the spot where it knows that you're missing the colon. It just wants you to add that in there. Once you add the colon, then everything's good, and you're ready to execute the code. The final error that is really common as a syntax error is just misspelling something. That could be either an identifier, a variable name in your program, or it could be a reserved word, one of the words in Python. And if you don't have something spelled exactly correctly, like if you if you initialize a quiz score list and then later on refer to it as quiz score list without the capital S, that'll get Python confused. It'll give you a syntax error whenever you get to that line in your program telling you that quiz score list, all lowercase, is not defined. That's just an indicator to you that this particular line in the program, where you're calling this append function, is using a variable name that's incorrect. So you just have to go through and look carefully and see where the spelling or capitalization is different than the previous declaration in your program. And that helps you fix that up. So those are the most common syntax errors that you can get in the program. Those are all things that make Python unable to process your code because it doesn't understand what you're talking about. In general, if you spend 15 minutes looking for a syntax error and you can't find it, then you should email your .py file either to me or to one of the lab aides and tutors, and they would be happy to help you locate the syntax error. Because you don't want to like spin your wheels. Like, it's worth reading through this and then thinking like, what does that mean? And trying a few things to fix it up yourself, especially using this list of common errors. But then after you've spent about 15 minutes, you don't want to waste any more time trying to find the error on your own. You want to like enlist some extra support. So don't be afraid to ask for help. These tips are just meant to make you feel a little bit more independent, but we're still all there for you as you're learning to use the Python language effectively.